There is something about Avatar, The Last Airbender that pulls you back. Not just the nostalgia of it, not just the warmth of familiar characters, or the comfort of a story you already know the ending of. There is something else. Something sitting underneath the surface of the show like a slow current beneath very still water. A feeling that the world is holding something back. That every answer it gives you contains another question inside it, coiled and quiet, waiting for a moment of stillness to unfold. Tonight, that is what we are going to sit with. The questions. The places in the show where two completely true things occupy the same space and refuse to resolve into a single clean answer, where the show holds contradictions up to the light and says, quietly, look, both of these are real. You are going to have to live in that. A paradox is not a mistake. That is the first thing to understand and, in some ways, the most important. A paradox is not a plot hole or a lapse in the writing room. It is not something a sharper editor would have caught. A paradox is what happens when the world refuses to simplify for your comfort. When two true things press up against each other and neither one yields. When the most honest thing a story can do is refuse to give you the clean resolution that stories are often expected to provide. Avatar is full of paradoxes. Dozens of them, layered on top of each other, some visible from the surface and some buried so deep they take years of returning visits to locate. And this is part of why the show feels the way it does when you let yourself drift back into it. Because a world that holds contradictions is a world that feels alive. It breathes in and it breathes out. It gives and it takes. It asks you to sit with uncertainty rather than resolve it. And it trusts you, consistently, to find that uncertainty restful rather than troubling. So let us begin. Let us move through every paradox the show has buried in its bones, slowly, with the kind of attention that a world built this carefully deserves. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling me where you are in the world right now and what time it is where you are. Whether it is deep into midnight, or the quiet edge of early morning, or somewhere in between with the day still deciding what it wants to be, I always love knowing where people are when they find these. And if you are not already subscribed, please do. It is completely free, it takes 1 second, and it is the best way to make sure this kind of content keeps finding you when you need it. Part 1. The Aang Paradox, the last hope who first had to run. Let us start at the very center of the show. Let us start with Aang. Aang is 12 years old when the story opens. He has been sealed inside a ball of ice for 100 years, preserved by a breath of airbending he released in the moment before the cold took him. He wakes into a world that has burned itself nearly beyond recognition during his absence. A world that needed him and did not have him. A world that sent fire across every border and tore down every temple and erased an entire civilization of people in the space of a single night, while the boy who could have stopped it was sleeping at the bottom of the ocean. And the thing the show tells you right away, before the end of the first episode, is this. He was not there because he ran. That is the weight at the center of everything. He knew what he was. He had been told by Monk Gyatso, the closest thing to a father he had in this world, that he was the Avatar. That his training had to change, had to accelerate, because the comet was coming and the balance of the world was held in the choices he was about to be asked to make. He was 12 years old and the people who loved him most looked at him, and he could see in their eyes that he was also already something other than a boy, something larger. Something that the world had a claim on that preceded any claim he might make on himself. And the weight of that, the sheer impossible weight of being named the vessel of 10,000 years of history at 12 years old, sent him running. He flew north on Appa into the worst storm either of them had ever seen, and the ice took them, and the world burned for a century. The show does not excuse this. It does not dress the flight in heroism, or find a way to reframe it as something other than what it was. Aang ran away. The consequences of him running away were enormous, were catastrophic, were measured in generations of suffering and entire cultures diminished past recovery. The Southern Water Tribe that we see in the first episode, that small huddle of tents on the ice with its handful of elderly residents and children and women, is not what the Southern Water Tribe was supposed to be. It is the ruin of what it was, after decades of systematic Fire Nation raids specifically targeting the waterbenders who kept the tribe vital. The Earth Kingdom has built its greatest city behind walls so thick that life inside them has become a kind of controlled forgetting. The air nomads are not a civilization in decline, they are ash. Every man, woman, and child, every monastery and temple, and every laughing monk who ever ruffled a young boy's arrow tattoos, gone inside a single night while the Fire Nation moved through their mountain homes with systematic, terrible efficiency. Aang visits the Southern Air Temple in the first season and finds it the way you find a place after something final has happened to it. Not destroyed in the explosive, obvious way of a city taken by siege. Quiet. The kind of quiet that does not belong to emptiness but to the permanent absence of specific people. His room is still there. The pie show sets are still on the tables. The necklace Gyatso wore is still in the hallway, and the bones nearby tell you everything the show has the restraint not to show you directly. He sits in the middle of all of that, and it comes apart in him. And the avatar state activates the first time the audience sees it, not as power but as grief. Not as a weapon, but as the sound a person makes when the world has shown them something too large to contain. The guilt of the 100 years lives in Aang for the entire series. It is in the way he goes quiet when certain subjects surface. It is in the nightmares that the show does not always name but sometimes shows you in the lines of his sleeping face. It is in the particular quality of his determination, which is not the clean, uncomplicated determination of a hero who has always known what he is doing and why. It is the determination of someone who is running towards something, partly in order to run from the version of himself who once ran away. And yet, here is exactly where the paradox opens up, and it opens wide. The same sensitivity that made Aang run is precisely the quality that makes him capable of being the avatar at all. Not capable in the technical elemental mastery sense. Capable in the deeper sense. The sense that matters. The air nomad philosophy that the show grounds him in is not decoration. It is not cultural flavor pasted over the surface of an otherwise conventional hero's journey. It is the operating system of his bending and, more importantly, the operating system of his conscience. Airbending, in every form it takes across the series, is defined by the refusal to meet force with force. By deflection, by redirection, by moving through the spaces that aggression leaves behind it. You cannot do that if you are closed off. You cannot bend air if you have armored yourself against the feeling of it. The element of freedom requires a free practitioner. Aang's openness, the wide-open emotional availability that made him afraid of what the world was asking him to carry, is the foundation of everything he is able to do inside that world. His gentleness is not a limitation the show has to work around. It is the argument the show is making. But then comes the question of Ozai, and the paradox sharpens to a point that is almost unbearable to hold. By the final arc of the third season, every person Aang trusts has arrived at the same answer through different routes. Katara, whose pragmatism is rooted in the long experience of loving people in a world that takes them, does not argue against the conclusion. Sokka, whose strategic mind has been working on this problem since before Aang woke up, has run the numbers and arrived at the same answer that every general in history has arrived at when faced with an enemy who will not yield. Toph, who sees the world in terms of what is real and what is pretend, has no patience for a question with an obvious solution. And the past avatars, the accumulated weight of thousands of years of people who have faced exactly this kind of impossible choice, tell him the same thing in their various voices. Sometimes protecting life requires ending a life. The avatar's purpose is balance, and balance is not a synonym for mercy. Aang cannot do it. He holds on to his air nomad values with the grip of a person who has already lost everything else, and he cannot open his hands. He goes into the ocean and he sits on an island alone with the question, and he asks every person and every past life and every stone of the island for a different answer, and no different answer comes until the lion turtle surfaces from the water and offers him one. Now sit with both sides of this for a moment, because both sides are real. The people telling Aang to kill Ozai are not cruel. They are not bloodthirsty or careless with the weight of what they are suggesting. They have thought it through. Fire Lord Ozai is not a man who made some regrettable decisions in complicated circumstances. He is a man who ordered the extermination of the air nomads without hesitation, who burned his own son's face for speaking out of turn at a war meeting, who plans, in the final hours of the series, to use the amplified power of Sozin's comet to burn the Earth Kingdom to the ground, to eliminate its population, to plant the Fire Nation's flag in the ash and build a new world from that beginning. The arguments for ending him are real arguments. They have moral weight. They are made by people who love Aang and who have seen enough of the war to know that some things do not stop unless you make them stop. And Aang is not wrong either. This is what makes it a paradox rather than a simple error on his part. He is not wrong to believe that the Avatar killing the Fire Lord reshapes what the Avatar means, permanently, in ways that may cost the world more over time than the alternative. He is not wrong to worry about the person he becomes if he treats the most extreme form of force available to him as the default resolution when every other option has been exhausted. He is not wrong to understand, intuitively, that the history of the world is full of people who were certain their cause was righteous enough to justify permanent, irreversible solutions, and that the rightness of the cause did not always redeem the solution in practice. What the show is doing in those final episodes is something quite sophisticated for any program, let alone one made for children. It is holding open the possibility that the instinct to reject the simplest answer is not always cowardice. That sometimes the refusal to accept the terms of a question is exactly where wisdom lives. That occasionally the most powerful thing a person can do is insist that there is a door in the wall that everyone else has certified is solid. Energy bending is the resolution the show gives him. The lion turtle surfaces and tells him that before the era of bending, humans bent the energy within themselves, and that this original art can be used to reach inside another person and reshape the fundamental nature of their spirit, not through damage, through contact, through Aang pressing his own spirit against Ozai's and holding on, inside that contact, until his own spirit proves immovable. Some viewers have found this unsatisfying. A writing room convenience, they say. A way to avoid making Aang pay the full cost of his convictions. But look at what the lion turtle actually says. The ability to bend the energy within a living being is the oldest form of bending there is. It predates all four elements. It predates the Avatar cycle itself. And the reason it has been forgotten is that it requires something almost impossible, a spirit completely stable in itself. A person who knows themselves so completely and is so settled in that knowledge that when they make contact with another person's spirit, they are not moved. Ozai's spirit, volcanic and consuming, presses back against Aang's during the energy bending sequence and nearly wins. The show does not pretend this is easy or certain. Aang almost loses himself inside Ozai's fire. He is held only by everything he has become over 3 seasons of becoming. The gift the lion turtle offers is not a shortcut. It is a test more severe than any conventional fight would have been, because it requires Aang to remain fully himself inside the pressure of everything that Ozai is. And the reason Aang survives it, the reason his spirit holds, is precisely the quality that everyone spent 3 seasons telling him needed to change. His openness, his conviction, his absolute refusal to become something other than what the air nomads made him. The thing that looked like weakness, that looked like the naivety of a child who did not understand the world well enough to do what needed to be done, turned out to be the only thing equal to the task. The Aang paradox, fully stated, runs like this. The person most responsible for the world's suffering is also the only one capable of healing it. The quality that made him run away is the same quality that makes his return mean something. His refusal to become less than himself is either the most heroic thing the show depicts or the most dangerous, depending on which episode you are watching and how much patience the moment has left for the idea that the world should accommodate the full size of a person's principles. Both are true. The show keeps both in view for 61 episodes, and when you stop trying to resolve them and simply let them coexist, there is something almost peaceful about it. Because uncertainty is not the enemy of truth. Uncertainty is what truth looks like when the question is large enough to deserve it. Part 2. The Zuko Paradox, the villain who was always the hero. There is a moment in the very first episode of Avatar, The Last Airbender, where Zuko, the primary antagonist, the scarred Fire Nation prince who exists in that episode for the singular purpose of being the first obstacle between the audience and the hero, does something that does not belong to a villain. A storm comes. A serious storm? The kind that kills sailors? And Zuko has a choice. He can stay below deck and protect himself, or he can go up and help his crew survive. The camera does not make a production of this. It does not pause on the decision or add music that instructs you how to feel. Zuko simply makes the choice. He goes up. He faces the storm. He puts himself between his crew and the worst of what the sky is offering. And then the episode continues, and Zuko is a villain again, hunting across the ice for a child, and the moment almost passes unremarked. But it does not pass, it stays. And it accumulates, episode by episode, into a portrait of a person who is consistently, quietly, something other than what his function in the narrative requires him to be. He never kills Aang. This is the fact that the series asks you to hold across the entire first season. Zuko's stated purpose, the goal around which his entire existence is organized in Season 1, is to capture the Avatar and bring him to his father. Capture, not kill. That distinction matters, and it matters even more when you notice how many opportunities Aang presents himself in. How many times across 20 episodes Aang is exhausted or unconscious or otherwise unable to defend himself, while Zuko is close enough to act. Zuko does not act. He captures and then declines to harm. He saves Aang from Admiral Zhao in the Blue Spirit episode at personal risk to his own mission. He passes up moment after moment after moment, where the cold logic of his stated goal would suggest a simpler solution, and the show never asks him to explain why. It does not need to ask. The explanation is already there in the storm. In the moment where he feeds a child in an Earth Kingdom village with no audience and no benefit to his mission. In the moment in the Blue Spirit episode itself where he and Aang share a campfire in the dark, briefly, two kids on opposite sides of a war who find themselves the only people in the world in that particular stretch of forest, and Aang asks if they could have been friends in a different world. Zuko does not answer, but something in his face does. The paradox of Zuko is not the simple one, not the one that says a villain becomes a hero. That story is real and the show tells it, but it is not the deepest thing the show is doing. The deepest story is this: Zuko was never the villain the show appeared to be using him as. He was always going to end up where he ends up. The 3 seasons of his arc are not the story of a bad person becoming good. They are the story of a person the world tried very hard to make into something he was not, finally, at great cost and over a long time, finding his way back to who he actually was before the trying started. The word honor is the key to all of this. Zuko says it hundreds of times across 3 seasons. In Season 1, it is his most repeated word, a mantra he uses to organize an internal world that would otherwise have nothing to organize around. Honor is what he lost when his father burned his face and banished him from the only home he had ever known. Honor is what he must recover to earn the right to return. The word functions as a container he carries everywhere with both hands, terrified to set it down because without it, he suspects he will have no reason to keep moving forward. But pay close attention to what Zuko actually does in the name of honor, and pay equal attention to the things he does without naming them. The things he calls honorable, including the pursuit of a 12-year-old child, the maintenance of a war he did not choose, the choice to side with Azula in the Crystal Caves even as everything in his body resists it, these are not honorable acts. He performs them in the name of honor, and they are not what that word is supposed to mean. And the things he does that are genuinely honorable, the acts of genuine moral weight, the moments where he is closest to the person he actually is, those things he does quietly, he does not name them. He does not hold them up and say, "Look, I am honoring something here." He just does them. He saves his crew. He feeds a child. He stands in front of his father at the age of 16 and says, "I am going to join the Avatar and help him defeat you." That last moment is the most important. That scene, the Day of Black Sun scene where Zuko finally walks into Ozai's throne room and says the true thing, is the moment the word honor disappears from his vocabulary almost entirely. He does not say he is doing this for honor. He says he is doing it because it is right. The distinction is everything. Honor was always the word he used for the thing he was chasing. When he finally has the thing itself, he does not need the word anymore. He has become the thing the word was always pointing at. It lives inside him now. Irreversibly, completely his own, and none of it would have been possible without Iroh. Iroh was the dragon of the West. He laid siege to Ba Sing Se for 600 days, a military operation on a scale that required organizational brilliance and the willingness to send thousands of men toward a wall that had never been breached. He was the most celebrated general in the Fire Nation's history at the height of his career. He killed a dragon, supposedly the last of its kind, and claimed the title that came with that kill. He was, by every external measure, the perfect expression of what the Fire Nation made of its best people. Powerful, accomplished, and aimed at the world like a weapon. Then his son Lu Ten died at the very siege Iroh had been conducting, and something cracked open in him, and through the crack came everything the Fire Nation had spent decades training him to suppress. The show reveals later that the dragon he supposedly killed was not killed at all. He found Ran and Shaw, the last two dragons, and learned from them the original truth of firebending. Fire is not destruction but life, the warmth that sustains rather than the force that consumes. And he told the world he had killed them to protect their secret. He saw something beautiful and real and true, and he covered for it, at the cost of the title he had earned, because the world he lived in would have destroyed it if it had known it existed. This is who Iroh actually is underneath the military career, and the famous siege, and the reputation that precedes him. A man who sees beauty and protects it. A man who finds truth and keeps it safe, even when keeping it safe costs him something. A man who, after the death of his son cracked him open, chose to become small and warm and present in a world that had rewarded him handsomely for being large and cold and distant. He makes tea. In prison, he makes tea. He finds a way to get a small pot and some leaves, and he makes tea in a prison cell, and he drinks it with the appreciation of someone who has decided that the present moment is the only moment that actually exists, and therefore it is worth paying attention to. He loses games of pai sho to strangers on purpose sometimes, just to watch their faces when they think they have beaten him. He sings to himself in the mornings. He talks to people who have not earned his attention and gives them his attention anyway, because he has discovered that people who have not earned attention are often the ones who most need it. The paradox of Iroh's joy is the most important thing about him. He is, by every objective measure, someone who has every reason to be defined by sorrow. He lost his son. He lost the direction his life had been heading. He lost his title and his position. He spent years in exile and then in prison. He watched his nephew make choices that hurt both of them, and he could not prevent any of it, and he did not allow any of it to make him closed. His joy is not the shallow optimism of someone who has avoided the hard things. It is the specific, embodied joy of someone who went all the way through the hardest things and found, on the other side, that the world was still full of tea and pai sho and sunrise and the uncomplicated pleasure of a conversation with someone interesting. The joy is earned. It is precise. It belongs to someone who knows exactly what it costs to arrive at it and who therefore does not take it for granted. When he is in prison in Season 2, the show checks in on him periodically, and each time it does, he is exercising, building himself back up, slowly, methodically, in the quiet of a cell with no audience and no guarantee that there will ever be an occasion to use what he is preparing. He does not know when he will get out. He may not get out. He exercises anyway, not because he is certain of the future, because he has decided that the version of himself who is ready is the version worth being, regardless of whether readiness is ever demanded. When Zuko comes to him in the prison, finally, genuinely broken, asking for forgiveness, and not knowing yet what forgiveness from someone like Iroh would feel like, Iroh does not make him earn it. He crosses the cell and he holds him, just that. The simple, enormous act of holding a person who has done things that should not be forgiven and choosing to forgive them anyway, not because the things they did were not real, but because love is larger than accounting for what people have done. The Zuko paradox, fully stated, he spent 3 seasons trying to become someone his father could be proud of, and the person he became in the process is the one his father would despise most. The honor he chased as an external prize turned out to be something internal he had been carrying since before his father burned his face. And the villain the show introduced in Episode 1 turned out to be, in some respects, more heroic than the hero. Not because Aang's heroism is lesser, because Zuko's heroism required something different. Aang's goodness grew from a foundation of love and community and a childhood unmarked by systematic cruelty. Zuko's goodness had to be excavated from underneath everything the world piled on top of it, everything fire and shame, and a father who believed that love was weakness, and he chose it anyway. In the end, he chose it because it was the only true thing left. And that choosing, the deliberate, irreversible choosing of who you are when every force around you is insisting you have no choice, is the bravest thing the show contains. Part 3. The Katara Paradox, the healer who carried the capability to destroy. Katara is the heart of the show, not in the sentimental sense, not in the sense of being simply kind or simply good. She is the heart in the way that the heart actually functions, which is by pumping everything through itself, by being the place all the different currents of the story pass through and leave changed. She is warm, and she is furious, and she is capable of extraordinary gentleness and extraordinary severity, and the show rarely lets her be only one of those things at a time. The Katara paradox begins with her element. Water is the element of change. The show tells you this explicitly through the philosophy built into each bending style. Water redirects. Water takes the shape of whatever contains it. Water finds the path of least resistance and moves through it rather than breaking against walls. In the Chinese philosophical tradition, the show draws most directly from. For waterbending, water represents both the softest and the most patient force in the world, and, in its accumulated form, the most overwhelming. A single drop does nothing to stone. Thousands of years of drops carve canyons. Katara is the most powerful waterbender of her generation, arguably the most powerful waterbender alive by the end of the series, and the arc of her skill is visible in the animation if you watch the series with that attention. In the first episodes, her movements are imprecise, and the water she controls is small in volume and poorly directed. After the stolen waterbending scroll in the middle of Season 1, after training with Master Pakku in the North Pole, after everything she learns and develops through Seasons 2 and 3, by the finale, Katara bends with a precision and a power that puts her in company with anyone who has ever practiced the art, and the show makes her earn every increment of that development through visible, specific effort. But the paradox of Katara is not about her power. It is about what she does with it. In the episode the show knows is the most morally complicated one it has ever made. The Southern Raiders. The man who came to the Southern Water Tribe when Katara was a child and killed her mother is alive. He was Fire Nation military, a specific officer on a specific mission to capture the last waterbender in the South, and Katara's mother died in his place because she told him she was the waterbender and she was not, and he killed her for the misdirection. This is not an abstract loss. It is the kind of specific, named, undeniable loss that leaves a hole in the shape of a person, a hole that never completely fills in, that shapes the person carrying it whether they intend to be shaped or not. Zuko knows who the man is, he tells Katara. He offers to help her find him. And Aang, gentle, principled Aang, tells her before she goes that revenge is poison, that hurting the man who hurt her will not bring her mother back, that the monk's teaching on this is clear. He offers her another path. Katara goes with Zuko. She finds the man. She has him, completely helpless. Encased in water she has frozen around his body. And she holds him there. And the rage she has carried since childhood is fully present in that moment, not as something distant or controlled, but as a live thing, as close to the surface as water itself is close to the surface of a waterbender. She has power. She has the man who took her mother. She has the clearest possible convergence of ability and justification. She does not kill him, but she does not release him warmly either. She tells him that she considered it, that she looked at him and found him so pathetic that killing him felt like more trouble than he was worth. She drops him, broken and terrified, and she walks away. This is the scene the fandom has turned over and examined from every angle for decades. Some people read it as Katara's finest moment. She chose not to kill. She chose mercy. She did not become what she had always hated. Others read it as something darker and more complicated, a moment where what she offers is not grace but contempt, a refusal to grant even the significance of her anger to a man who does not deserve it. She chose not to kill him, but she also made sure he would carry the encounter. The waterbending paradox lives in this scene. Water heals. Water also bloodbends. Water is gentle and water is overwhelming. And Katara, who is water in human form, contains all of those possibilities without contradiction. She can heal Aang back from death with spirit water. She can trap an opponent in ice without visible effort. She can bloodbend, a thing she learns from Hama and immediately wishes she did not know, a thing she uses exactly twice and hates herself both times. The same sensitivity that makes her extraordinary as a healer makes her extraordinary as a fighter and potentially devastating as someone with a deep, specific, personal grievance. The paradox is that the show never resolves this tension in her. She is warm and she is frightening. and the show lets both coexist in the same body without asking you to dismiss either one. The love she has for her brother, for Aang, for everyone she brings into her care, is the love of someone who knows exactly what loss feels like, who has carried a specific loss since childhood, and who chooses every day to love anyway. That choosing, repeated across every episode, is the definition of courage in the show's world, not the absence of fear or fury, the presence of love alongside them. Water, in Chinese philosophy, is yin. It is associated with stillness, with wisdom, with softness, and it also holds inside it a latent, enormous force that becomes visible only when there is nowhere left to go but forward. Katara embodies both, the stillness and the force, the healing and the capacity for something that would not easily be called healing. Both are real. Both belong to the same element. Both belong to the same person. Part 4. The Bending Paradox. The rules that follow themselves into darkness. Every bending style in the Avatar world is governed by rules. Not the soft, flexible kind of rules that bend for narrative convenience, but real, principled, philosophically grounded rules that connect each element to a martial art, a spiritual tradition, and a physical logic the show applies, with unusual consistency across 3 seasons. Water follows the moon and redirects rather than resists. Earth responds to what is solid and waits rather than acts. Fire is generated by breath and conviction and moves forward without hesitation. Air flows around everything and never opposes directly. These rules are the skeleton of the world. They give bending texture and weight, and the feeling of a place operating according to its own internal logic, rather than the convenience of whatever the story needs at any particular moment. When a waterbender moves, you can predict the next motion from the principles of the element. When an earthbender plants his feet and lowers his center of gravity, you know something massive is about to occur. The rules create the experience of watching something real, even though none of it is real, and that experience is what makes the action sequences in Avatar feel different from action sequences in other shows of its era. And then the show breaks its own rules. Every time it does, it reveals something deeper about what the rules were actually describing. Start with bloodbending, because bloodbending is the most extreme example of what happens when the rules are followed to their logical conclusion. The rule for waterbending is clear. You bend water. Water in rivers and oceans and the air itself. Water in clouds and in ice. Water in plants, which the Foggy Swamp Tribe demonstrates in the 2nd season by bending the moisture inside vines and roots and making them move like living arms. The rule seems finite. Water is wherever you find it, and wherever you find it, a waterbender can touch it. This includes, as it turns out, inside every living body on Earth. Hama discovers this in a Fire Nation prison. She has been there for years. The Fire Nation knows enough about waterbenders to keep them away from their element. There is no river near the cell. No rain comes through the window. She is cut off from the thing that gives her power, and she is also cut off from the one leverage point she has against the people who took her home and her life and everyone she knew from her. She sits in that cell long enough to find the water that is always there, the water the prison cannot take away, the water inside the walls when the humidity is right, the water inside rats and birds that come close to the window, the water in the bodies of the guards themselves. She does not discover bloodbending as an act of malice or a deliberate choice between available alternatives. She discovers it as the only path that remained after every other path was sealed. Desperation is a kind of creativity when there is no other kind available. Bloodbending is not a violation of the waterbending rules. It is the rules followed to a place the rules never anticipated arriving. The premise is simple. Water is in living bodies. A waterbender can bend water. Therefore, a waterbender can bend the water in a living body. The horror is not in the logic. The logic is straightforward. The horror is in what the logic means. It means the human body is not a sanctuary from bending. It means that autonomy itself can be bent, that the thing that makes us most fully ourselves, the ability to move of our own volition, to inhabit our own bodies as agents rather than objects, is not protected by any rule the universe has written into its foundations. The universe simply does not contain that protection. The waterbender's power reaches all the way in. The episode that introduces bloodbending is structured like a horror film, and this is not an accident or a tonal misstep. The production team understood that they were introducing something that required the full visual and sonic vocabulary of horror to communicate properly. The dark blues and grays of the color palette, the pacing that slows to let dread accumulate, the campfire stories at the opening that signal what genre you are entering, all of it intentional. The show is saying, this is different. What you are about to see is not bending as you have understood it. It is the edge of something, and edges are where safe things become unsafe. Metal bending, Toph's invention, is a different kind of rule breaking, and it is a perfect expression of who Toph is at the level of her fundamental character. The earthbending rule is that you bend earth, stone and soil and crystal and mineral matter. Metal has been processed, refined, taken out of the ground and transformed by human effort into something that no longer carries the organic, living mineral qualities that earthbending responds to. By the logic of the rule, metal should be off limits. Toph finds the earth inside it anyway. She can feel, through her seismic sense and through the exceptional sensitivity she has developed as a consequence of living her entire perceptual life through the soles of her feet, the trace amounts of unrefined mineral still present in even the most processed metal, the impurities that the smelting process could come fully separate from the material it was trying to purify. She bends those. She reaches past the surface of what the metal appears to be and touches what it actually is, which is earth that has been worked but not transformed completely. This is the same operation as her primary perception. Toph does not see the surface of things. She feels what is really there, the vibrations and densities and movements that the surface both conceals and expresses simultaneously. Seismic sense, like metal bending, is a form of perception that goes through appearances to reach reality. She has always done this. She does it with the ground. She does it with people, who she knows through their footsteps, through the tiny biological variations in weight and movement and heartbeat that betray what their faces are trying to conceal. She does it with Iroh, whom she immediately recognizes as a kind old man regardless of his history, because kindness has a weight and a rhythm that her feet know. Metal bending is not just a new technique. It is the inevitable extension of Toph's way of being in the world. And then there is lightning, the elemental technique that tells you the most about the philosophical dimension of bending. Lightning is pure fire, fire with all the volatility removed, fire so refined it has stopped being warm and become only fast and absolute. It is produced not by emotion but by the deliberate absence of emotion, by a mind that has separated yin and yang and created the potential difference that lightning lives in. Azula can produce it because her mind is, for most of the series, precisely that, separated. Orderly, each element in its place. Her fire is blue because it burns at a higher temperature, which is the visual expression of an internal state that has precision where most people have feeling. But here is where the lightning paradox lives. Iroh redirects lightning, and he does it using a water-bending movement. He studied waterbending specifically to find a way to survive lightning, and what he found was that lightning, like all force, can be redirected rather than opposed. You let it in through one hand, you trace the path through your own body that keeps it away from your heart, and you send it out through the other. The element of fire, in its most refined and most lethal form, is survived by borrowing from the philosophy of water. That is the bending paradox in its most complete form. The elements speak to each other. The philosophies behind them are not entirely separate. They are in dialogue, and the conversations between them are where the most interesting things happen. Not in the mastery of a single element carried to its extreme, but in the spaces where one element's wisdom reveals something that another element had no way to see on its own. The bending paradox, stated fully. The rules are real, and they are also, followed far enough, capable of arriving somewhere no one intended them to go. The rules do not fail. They simply turn out to be more complete than anyone understood when they were first laid down. The element of change can control blood. The element of substance can be found inside the things that try to leave it behind. The element of destruction can carry the philosophy of the element of change inside its most dangerous expression. And underneath all four elements, older than all four elements, is the fifth thing. The energy within a person, the most fundamental fact of a living body, bendable only by someone who knows themselves well enough to touch another self without losing their own. Part 5. The Avatar Cycle Paradox, 10,000 Years of the Same Burden. The Avatar cycle has been running for 10,000 years. That is the number the show gives you, and it is worth sitting with for a moment rather than simply absorbing it as world building. 10,000 years is the time between the first Avatar and Aang. 10,000 years of the same pattern repeating, with the same soul wearing a different face in every generation, accumulating the weight of every life it has lived, every choice it has made, every relationship it has formed, and then been separated from by death and rebirth. 10,000 years of memory, of continuity, of a single spirit carrying forward through every change the world has gone through. At a distance, this is magnificent. The Avatar cycle is the world's mechanism for preserving balance across time, for ensuring that no generation faces the hardest questions entirely alone, for maintaining the lines of communication between the physical and spirit worlds across centuries of change and conflict. It is, by design, a gift, and it is also, by design, a burden that no individual human being ever consented to carry. Aang did not choose to be the Avatar. He was told at 12 years old, after a childhood of unusual ability that he had assumed was simply his, that he was not entirely his own. That part of what he was had lived many times before and would live many times again after he was done with it. That his life, his specific, irreplaceable 12-year-old life on the Southern Air Temple, with his teachers and his friends and the games of airball in the afternoons, was also the current expression of a project that had been running for 100 centuries before he was born, and would keep running long after the memory of him had faded into the general archive of past Avatar lives. The Avatar cycle paradox is this: the thing that makes the Avatar powerful, the accumulated wisdom and memory of 10,000 years of past lives, is the same thing that makes the Avatar's individual existence precarious. You are the Avatar. You are also yourself. And those two things do not always want the same things or agree about what the moment requires. Consider how the past Avatars respond when Aang asks them for guidance about Ozai. They tell him to kill Ozai, every single one. The accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years of people who have faced impossible choices comes to the same answer. And Aang, who is also their heir and their continuation, says no. He says there must be another way. He is arguing with himself. In the most literal sense the show can construct, the past Avatars are not separate people outside him. They are within him. Their memories are his memories. Their wisdom is supposed to be his wisdom. When he disagrees with them, he is performing an act of radical self-determination inside the very architecture that is supposed to define what he is. He is saying, I am more than the sum of what came before me. I am specifically me, in this specific moment, with these specific values that are mine and not just inherited, and what I think matters even when what I think contradicts everything that 10,000 years of thinking has arrived at. There is a grandeur to this that the show handles quietly. It does not make a speech out of it. Aang simply holds his position, and the show lets him hold it, and then it finds him an answer that vindicates the holding. But the broader paradox of the Avatar cycle remains after the finale. The clearest expression of it is not Aang, but Avatar Roku. Roku's story is the shadow that falls over the entire series. He is the Avatar who failed. Not because he was weak or corrupt or careless, but because he was human. He had a friend. A specific, particular, irreplaceable friend from before either of them was Fire Lord or Avatar or anything except two boys who grew up together and loved each other the way people who grow up together love each other. And when that friend revealed himself to be the instrument of the world's worst century, Roku stopped him but did not end him. Because they were friends, because the history between them mattered to him in a way that transcended the office he held. And Sozin outlived him, and watched him die, and then used Sozin's comet to launch the war that consumed 100 years. The Avatar cycle asks its chosen people to transcend their personal attachments in service of the world's balance, and Roku could not do it. He was too human, too loyal, too rooted in the specific gravity of a friendship that was real and that deserved to mean something. And the cost of that humanness was a century of war. But here is where the paradox bends back on itself. Because the show does not tell you Roku was wrong to have loved Sozin, it does not say the Avatar should have no personal attachments, no loyalties, no memories that belong to the individual rather than the office. Yang Chen, The air nomad avatar before Aang, tells him explicitly that the avatar must sacrifice personal spiritual needs for the needs of the world. And Aang pushes back. He says there has to be another way. He is 12 years old, and he is arguing with the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of past lives, and the show lets him, because the show understands that the demand Yang Chen describes is genuinely inhumane. You cannot be a bridge between the human world and the spirit world if you are not yourself human. You cannot maintain balance across 4 nations if you have no feeling for what it costs the people inside those nations to live within the balance you are maintaining. The avatar needs to be attached, needs to love specific people for specific reasons, needs to be at some irreducible level, one person and not just the office. And that need keeps costing things. It cost Roku the century. It will cost future avatars other things. The cycle is a beautiful mechanism that runs on human fuel, and the fuel it burns is the individuality of every person it claims. The freedom it gives the world is purchased with the freedom of the avatar. The balance it maintains is upheld by people who can never be fully balanced themselves, who are always tilting between the universal and the personal, between what the world needs and what they need, with no guarantee those two things will ever completely coincide. 10,000 years, the same cost, the same gift, over and over and over, gentle and relentless and impossibly old. Part 6, The Fire Nation Paradox, the civilization that built the world it tried to burn. Here is something the show encodes in the background of every scene set inside the Fire Nation's borders. It is the most technologically advanced civilization in the Avatar world, not modestly, by generations. It has industrial factories producing weapons and armor at scale. It has steam-powered battleships capable of crossing oceans. It has armored land crawlers that move across terrain without bending. It has war balloons. It has drills large enough to bore through the outer wall of Ba Sing Se. It has submarines. No other nation has these things. The Earth Kingdom has scale and history and the stubborn weight of a people who have held their ground for centuries, but its military relies primarily on its benders and its walls, not on mechanical advantage. The water tribes have extraordinary skills of survival and an intimate relationship with the most powerful elemental force available to any bender, but no factory and no industrial capacity. The air nomads had their spirituality and their freedom and the essentially untouchable quality of a people who live in the mountains and on the wind, but no manufacturing base. The Fire Nation has all of it, and the show asks you to think about why, without ever stating the answer directly. The answer connects to the show's most serious real-world parallel. The Fire Nation's combination of industrial technology and military conquest mirrors the patterns of imperial expansion that characterized the 19th and early 20th centuries. The period when nations that had developed industrial capacity used that capacity to project military force across distances that had previously been insurmountable, claiming territory and resources, and the labor of populations who had no equivalent capability to resist. The belief that technological advancement conferred not just military advantage, but moral authority. That the more advanced civilization had not just the power, but the obligation to impose its order on the less advanced, that conquest was progress. Fire Lord Ozai believes this. He says it explicitly in the final season. The plan to burn the Earth Kingdom is not, in his framing, an act of atrocity. It is a plan to clear the ground for a new world built on Fire Nation values, which, in his telling, are the highest values available. He is not a man who knows he is doing evil and does not care. He is, and this is the more disturbing possibility, a man who genuinely does not know he is doing evil because he has lived inside a story about his own civilization's righteousness for so long that the story has become the only reality he can perceive. This is how real imperialism has always worked. Not through the conscious choice of people who know they are causing harm and prefer it, primarily through the deeply sincere conviction of people who believe they are giving something to the world rather than taking something from it. The Fire Nation paradox deepens when you look at what the Fire Nation's industrial capacity actually produces for the world after the war ends. By the time of the Legend of Korra, the technology the Fire Nation pioneered has become the foundation of Republic City, the great multicultural metropolis that Aang and Zuko co-found. The trains and the lights and the electrical systems and the radio towers that connect it, this technology came from the Fire Nation's industrial tradition transmitted through peace to a world that no longer needed to weaponize it. The tools of conquest became the tools of connection, not because the tools changed, because the intentions behind them did. And intentions can change in ways that tools cannot, which means the technology was never the problem. The technology was always just technology, capable of producing either the drill that bores through Ba Sing Se's wall or the train that carries people between nations. The difference was never the machine. The difference was what the person operating it believed the machine was for. And then there is the paradox of firebending itself. The show spends most of 3 seasons presenting fire as the most dangerous and aggressive of the 4 elements, the one most clearly aligned with destruction. And then Aang and Zuko travel to the ancient Sun Warrior civilization and meet the last 2 dragons, Ran and Shaw. And the dragons show them the original truth of firebending. The fire they demonstrate is not destruction. It is all the colors of fire at once, the full spectrum. And what Aang and Zuko both experience inside that circle of light is not danger but something closer to understanding. The fire the dragons show them is warmth, life, the sun that makes things grow, the breath that keeps the body moving, the body heat that keeps a person alive through cold nights. Fire is not destruction. Fire was always life. And the Fire Nation, in the process of building its empire, forgot this. Somewhere in the course of a century of conquest, the element of life was trained into the element of aggression, and the bending that resulted was narrowed, limited, cut off from the source that made it meaningful. The Fire Nation paradox. The most destructive force in the world carries inside it the most life-giving element. The civilization that caused the most suffering built the tools the world's future runs on. The element associated with conquest is also the element of the sun, the breath, the warmth that keeps the body alive. The question was never the fire, it was always what the fire was aimed at. Part 7. The Spirit World Paradox, the place that is nowhere and reaches everywhere. The spirit world is the show's most mysterious geography, and the paradox of it begins with the most basic question: where is it? The show gives you various answers, and none of them completely resolve into a simple map coordinate. It is a parallel realm, existing alongside the physical world without occupying the same space. Aang enters it through meditation, through the deliberate internal process of releasing his connection to his body and allowing the Avatar spirit's older nature to take precedence. Other people enter it accidentally, through areas of intense spiritual concentration, through encounters with powerful spirits, through sleep or trauma or extreme emotional states that thin the membrane between what is physical and what is not. But also, certain places in the physical world are so saturated with spiritual energy that the spirit world becomes accessible from them, without any effort. The swamp in the Earth Kingdom, the spirit oasis at the North Pole, the ancient air temples. These are places where the 2 realms bleed into each other, where the boundary is thin enough that what happens on one side creates immediate ripples on the other. This is the first layer of the paradox. If the spirit world is a separate realm, why does it seem to be everywhere at once? If it is distinct from the physical world, why is every significant spiritual event immediately legible in the physical world? The moon is a spirit swimming in a pond. When the moon spirit is killed, every waterbender on Earth loses their bending simultaneously, instantly, regardless of where they are or how far from the oasis. The boundary is real, and the boundary is also, in certain lights, not the separator it appears to be. The realms are distinct, and they are also not entirely separate. The spirits themselves are the deepest part of the paradox. They are not the benevolent, comprehensible presences that human spiritual traditions often imagine when they reach for the spiritual. They are old in a way that changes their nature. They predate human civilization. Many of them predate the Avatar cycle itself. They operate according to their own logic, which does not align neatly with human categories of good and evil, fair and unfair, proportionate and disproportionate. Hey Bai, the forest spirit who attacks a village in Season 1, is not malicious, it is grieving. Its forest has been burned. The grief of a spirit, this ancient and this rooted in a place, is not measured in human terms. Its response is not calculated. It simply is the grief, fully and without remainder, and the village happens to be in range. This is the show's most consistent teaching about the spirit world, delivered through example after example, rather than through explicit statement. The spirits do not weigh their responses against a standard of human fairness. They simply respond. They are, in this sense, closer to natural forces than to persons. And yet they are persons, in the sense that they have specific identities and specific histories and specific relationships with specific places and things. They are persons in the way that very old things are persons, which is to say they carry so much history that the distinction between who they are and what they have been through has largely ceased to be meaningful. And the spirits are vulnerable. This is the paradox that cuts deepest. Things this old, this powerful, this fundamental to the operation of the world are also contingent. The moon can be killed. The spirits can be frightened away from the places they inhabited and that they shaped and that shaped them in return. The spirit world is ancient. It is also mortal in the sense that its individual inhabitants can be lost. The spirit world paradox. The oldest things in the world are also the most fragile. The most powerful forces are the ones nobody thought to protect, and the bridge that maintains the connection between the human world and the spirit world is a single person, a 12-year-old boy who was asleep for 100 years, who is learning to navigate both realms in real time while a war burns everything around him. Part 8. The Toph Paradox, seeing everything through what cannot be seen. Toph Beifong is the most immediately paradoxical character in the show, because her paradox is visible in every scene she appears in, without any elaboration required. She is blind. She is also the best earthbender alive. Not the best blind earthbender. The best earthbender, period, with no qualifying clause. She wins the Earth Rumble tournament before Team Avatar knows she exists, defeating benders much larger and more experienced than herself, with a style of movement and a form of perception that no one else in the world uses. She is 12 years old and she is the champion of an underground earthbending tournament, and the first time the audience sees her fight, the fight is over so quickly that it takes a moment to understand what happened. The connection between her blindness and her ability is not incidental. It is structural. She cannot see the surface of things, which means she was never limited to reading the surface of things. She developed seismic sense, the ability to feel the vibrations that move through the earth from every source within range, as her primary form of perception. And seismic sense, while it does not give her access to the visual information that sighted people take for granted, gives her something they do not have. She reads the world through its movement, through what it does and how it does it, and where the force of it goes. She reads people through their footsteps, which are their heartbeats made visible as contact with the earth, which are the truest thing about them. You can lie with your face. You cannot easily lie with the weight and rhythm of the way you move. Toph knows Iroh is kind before anyone else does. She knows Zuko is conflicted before the show has offered enough information to confirm it. She reads both of them through their feet, and the feet do not lie. Her blindness, the thing the world told her was her limitation, the thing her parents used to justify keeping her in a small room with windows she was not supposed to look out of, turns out to be the source of a form of perception more reliable than sight because it operates at the level of reality rather than the level of appearance. Her parents loved her genuinely, and the show is careful about this. It does not make the Beifong family simply cruel or simply wrong. They loved their daughter, and their love expressed itself as protection, and that protection expressed itself as restriction, and the restriction was so complete that it nearly prevented the person inside it from ever becoming herself. The most powerful earthbender alive grew up in a house where the world was carefully managed to prevent her from encountering anything that might challenge her or demand more from her than the world thought she could give. Their love was real. Their love was also, almost catastrophically, a cage. The paradox extends to metal bending, the technique she invents by finding the earth inside metal. It is the same perceptual operation as everything else she does. She finds what is real inside what appears to be something else. She finds the truth inside the presentation. She bends the world into a new shape by refusing to accept the shape it insists on showing her. And this capacity, this specific form of sight that her blindness gave her access to, becomes the foundation of an entire bending discipline that outlasts her, that her students develop into a metal-bending police force that continues reshaping what earthbending means for generations after her. The thing her parents protected her from was the thing that made her extraordinary. The limitation the world assigned her was the condition of her gift, and she had to leave. had to walk out the door and into the world with bare feet on the earth before any of it became visible. The Toph paradox. Her greatest gift is the direct consequence of her greatest loss. What looked like absence was actually a different kind of presence. What looked like less was actually more. And the people who loved her most understood her least, not because their love was false, but because they could not see past the surface of her, which is the exact limitation she was never subject to when looking at them. Part 9. The War Paradox. What the violence left behind. The 100-Year War is the backdrop of everything. It is present in every scene even when it is not visible, the way certain sounds are present in a room even after they have stopped, continuing to vibrate in the structure of the walls. The Avatar world is a world shaped by a century of systematic violence, and everything in it has been bent by that shaping. The war is a catastrophe. The show is absolutely clear about this across all 3 seasons. People die in it. Families are broken. Communities are scattered. Entire ways of life are erased. The air nomads are gone so completely that Aang, for most of the series, cannot name another living person who shares his element. When he eventually dies, that tradition will pass to Tenzin and through Tenzin to whoever Tenzin can teach, and each generation will have a little less of it than the one before, not because they love it less, but because you cannot fully transmit what you have not lived, and the living is already gone. And yet the war is also, paradoxically, the mechanism by which every meaningful transformation in the show becomes possible. Without the war, there is no urgency. Without the urgency, Aang does not meet Katara and Sokka with the weight that makes that meeting matter. Toph stays in her compound. Her extraordinary gifts are never given the room they need to develop into what they become. Zuko's long arc of suffering and questioning and eventual choosing either does not happen at all, because there is no banishment, or it happens in a different key, without the same stakes, without the same cost, without the depth of feeling that comes from having lost everything you thought you wanted, and then finding that what you thought you wanted was not actually what you needed. The characters who come out of the war as we know them could not be those people without the war having been what it was. Katara's extraordinary waterbending developed under the pressure of a childhood in a community that had lost all its benders and needed its remaining members to be extraordinary. Sokka's tactical intelligence was honed by the specific absence of the warriors who should have protected his village, which meant he had to find the warrior inside himself rather than learning it from outside. Zuko's capacity for choosing with conviction, for making the harder right choice rather than the easier wrong one, was built in the fires of everything the war forced him to be before he was ready to be himself. This is not an argument that the war was good. The suffering was real and enormous, and was not redeemed by what it produced in the people who survived it. But it is an argument that the people who exist inside history do not get to be separate from it, and that the shapes history gives to people are sometimes, at their edges, the shapes those people needed to grow into. The war paradox extends to the aftermath. Zuko becomes Fire Lord. He is 16 years old. He is the Fire Lord of a nation of people who were raised on the same beliefs he was, who were taught from childhood that the Fire Nation's expansion was civilization being offered to the uncivilized, that the war was a gift the world should be grateful to receive. He has to lead these people toward a truth that most of them have never had a reason to look for, and that when it arrives, will require them to reassemble their entire understanding of who they are and what their civilization has meant for the last 100 years. This is the hardest work the show asks of its characters, and it is the work that happens after the finale ends, in the years the show cannot show you. It is the work of changing not just what people do, but what they believe they are. Not just reforming a government, but reshaping the stories of people tell themselves about their own goodness. It cannot be done in a single dramatic act. It has to be done the way Iroh does everything, which is slowly, with patience, one honest conversation at a time, one cup of tea at a time, one moment of choosing not to look away from the difficult thing at a time. The war ended. The work it left behind has barely begun. Part 10. The Iroh Paradox, the conqueror who became the world's gentlest teacher. Iroh's biography, stated plainly, is a contradiction. He is the man who laid siege to Ba Sing Se for 600 days, the most celebrated general in the Fire Nation's modern history. A man who commanded armies and understood the machinery of war intimately and efficiently. He is also the man who plays pai sho in tea shops and makes friends with people who have nothing he needs. He is the man who wept at the killing of the moon spirit while standing next to the man who committed it. He is the man who found his nephew across 3 seasons of bad choices and loved him without condition through all of them. These are not two different people who share a body, they are one person who changed, not transformed overnight, changed across years, through grief and wandering and the slow accumulation of days in which he chose to be present rather than armored. Iroh the General was, in some real sense, a performance, not a dishonest one, a role shaped for him by his culture and his birth position and the specific path of least resistance available to the Fire Nation's crown prince. He was good at it, exceptionally good. And then his son died, and the role stopped fitting, and in the space that grief opened up, he found someone else inside himself. Someone who had always been there, underneath the armor and the rank and the centuries' worth of training in the appropriate uses of force. The paradox of Iroh's joy is the most important thing about him. He is, by every objective measure, someone who has every reason to be defined by sorrow. He lost his son. He lost the direction his life had been heading. He watched his nephew make choices that hurt both of them, and he could not prevent any of it. And he did not allow any of it to make him closed. His joy is not the shallow optimism of someone who has avoided the hard things. It is the specific, embodied joy of someone who went all the way through the hardest things and found, on the other side, that the world was still full of tea and pie show and sunrise and the uncomplicated pleasure of a conversation with someone interesting. The joy is earned. It is precise. It belongs to someone who knows exactly what it costs to arrive at it and who therefore does not take it for granted. He tells Zuko, in one of the show's quietest and most devastating moments, he is not sure he is ready to forgive himself. This is not false modesty. It is the honest assessment of a man who has looked at what he participated in and who understands that guilt is proportionate to the harm caused and that the harm caused was real and large. He is not performing guilt. He is carrying it. He carries it alongside the joy and the warmth and the capacity for love that makes him who he is, and none of those things cancels any of the others out. They coexist in him the way all true things coexist, imperfectly, without clean resolution, demanding that you hold all of them at once. This is what it looks like to have integrated your grief, rather than simply survived it, not to have moved past it, not to have resolved it, not to have found a story that makes it mean something comfortable, to have put it inside you and let it become part of who you are and gone on being fully present anyway. The Iroh paradox. Wisdom this deep cannot be taught. It can only be pointed at. The pointing is what the show does with him across 3 seasons. He appears in moments of crisis and stillness and defeat and small pleasure, and he is always, in every one of those moments, completely himself. The same person in every register of experience, present, warm, carrying everything he has ever lost and not letting the carrying change the quality of his presence to the person in front of him. Part 11. The balance paradox. The thing that cannot hold still. The Avatar's purpose is to maintain balance. This is the foundational claim of the show's entire premise, stated in the opening narration of every episode, and balance is presented as the highest value. Not justice, not freedom, not happiness or safety or any single nation's prosperity. Balance, the system maintained, the elements in equilibrium, the nations in relationship rather than in isolation or domination. And here is the paradox. Balance, as the show uses it, is not a destination. It is not a state you arrive at and maintain through minor adjustments. It is an ongoing negotiation between forces that are each, individually, inclined toward imbalance. Water and fire repel each other. Earth resists air. The nations have distinct philosophies and distinct interests and distinct histories, and those distinctions generate friction continuously. Maintaining balance between them is not keeping something stable. It is managing something that is never stable, that is always pressing in one direction or another, that requires constant attention and constant adjustment. This is true of physical balance. Stand on one foot. You are not still. You are making hundreds of tiny corrections per second, most below conscious awareness, to keep yourself from falling. What looks like stillness from the outside is constant motion from the inside. The Avatar's balance is the same. What looks from the outside like a world at peace is, from the inside of the work of maintaining it, A constant series of small corrections applied to a system perpetually inclined toward the kind of imbalance that looks like war. The avatar cannot maintain balance by staying in one place. The cycle of reincarnation keeps the avatar moving between nations, embodying different elements, seeing the world from different positions, so that no single perspective becomes the default. The balance is maintained by constant movement, constant repositioning, constant willingness to inhabit the experience of the people whose lives the avatar is supposed to serve. And the deeper paradox? The avatar is supposed to be neutral, belonging to all nations equally, standing outside the conflicts rather than inside them. And yet every avatar the show has ever depicted is unmistakably formed by the nation they were born into. Aang is an air nomad to his marrow. Kyoshi, depicted in flashback, is an Earth Kingdom woman, immovable, direct, and willing to let justice take 500 years to complete itself. Roku was Fire Nation, formal and proud and hampered by a Fire Nation nobleman's sense of personal loyalty. The Avatar cycle was supposed to create neutrality. What it actually creates is a succession of people who are each deeply, specifically, culturally particular. The balance paradox. The world requires balance, and balance requires constant motion, and constant motion means the system is never truly at rest, and the avatar who maintains the system is never truly neutral. The cycle that produces avatars produces people who are exactly as specific and exactly as human as the people they are supposed to be balanced between. The system works not despite these contradictions, but through them. Not because it achieves the clean neutrality it aims for, but because each imperfect, particular, culturally specific avatar adds something to the accumulated understanding that the cycle carries forward. Aang's particular gentleness, his air nomad conviction that life is sacred, his specific inability to become something harder than he is added to the record. It informs whoever comes after. The next avatar who faces an enemy that the whole world is telling them to kill will hear Aang's voice among the voices of the past lives saying, "I found another way," and maybe the next avatar will find it too. Or maybe not. But the possibility will be in the archive, precisely because Aang was himself rather than the thing the moment seemed to require. 10,000 years of particular people, each one adding their specific vision to the accumulated understanding. This is what the cycle actually preserves. Not neutrality, not abstract balance. The long, continuous conversation of specific people trying to hold together a world that keeps pulling itself apart, each one adding their voice, none of them able to hear the whole conversation they are participating in, all of them trusting that the conversation is worth continuing. Part 12. The final paradox, the show that solves everything and keeps everything. Avatar. The Last Airbender ends with a sunset. Aang and Katara on a balcony overlooking Ba Sing Se, the golden light falling on a city that is still standing. The camera pulls back slowly, giving you distance from the characters it has held close for 3 seasons, and the pullback is the show's last gift to you. It lets you go. It says, in the only language cameras speak, they are going to be fine. You can release them, but nothing is actually resolved, not in the way that resolution usually means. Zuko is 16 years old and he is the Fire Lord of a nation that spent a century in systematic conquest, and the people he governs were taught from childhood that everything the Fire Nation did was right and necessary and good. Changing that belief will take not years but generations, and the work of it will be harder than the war itself in some ways, because it is invisible. You can end a war with a victory. You cannot end an ideology with a victory. You displace it and it waits. And then the moment changes, and it comes back with different language and the same gravity. The Southern Water Tribe is still a handful of people on ice. The air nomads are still ash and silence. There are no other air nomads. Aang is all of it. He is the only living keeper of a tradition that existed for as long as the Avatar cycle, and when he eventually dies, that tradition will pass to Tenzin and through Tenzin to whoever Tenzin can teach, and each generation will have a little less of it than the one before, not because they love it less, but because you cannot transmit what you have not lived, and the living is already gone. The world is saved in the most immediate sense. The worst possible version of the immediate future has been averted. Ozai cannot bend. The airship fleet is grounded. The war is over. The mechanism of the catastrophe is dismantled, and the people who survived are standing in the morning light of the day after, able to look at each other and at the sky without flinching. This is victory. This is what it looks like. Not transformation. Not the world made new. The worst thing averted. The ground cleared. The possibility of something better made possible for the first time in 100 years. The possibility, not the thing itself. And the show knows this. It does not pretend the work is done. It ends on the possibility rather than the achievement, because the achievement is not complete and the show is too honest to pretend it is. The final paradox of Avatar is the paradox that lives inside all the others and gives them their common shape. The show works relentlessly, across 61 episodes, toward a resolution it does not believe is possible, and it knows it does not believe this, and it keeps working anyway. It tells a story about hope, told by writers who understood hope not as a feeling but as a posture, as the decision to act as though things might get better even when you cannot know that they will, as the refusal to stop moving towards something even when the something is far away and the evidence for its arrival is incomplete. Hope, in the Avatar world, is not optimism. Optimism is the belief that things will work out. Hope is the decision to behave as though they might even when the decision is not supported by certainty. Every character the show loves embodies this. Aang, who refuses to accept the terms of the question. Zuko, who keeps making the wrong choice and keeps trying again anyway. Katara, who chooses to love in a world that has given her extensive, specific, personal reasons not to. Toph, who walks out of her cage on bare feet not because she is certain of what she will find, but because staying has become more impossible than leaving. Iroh, who does his push-ups in prison and makes tea from whatever is available, and waits with complete patience for a door that may or may not open. And the show itself embodies it. 61 episodes made by people who believed the details matter, that the things you do not notice are as important as the things you do, that the calligraphy you cannot read, and the martial art you cannot name, and the lunar cycle you did not track are all worth doing correctly, not because they will be recognized, but because they are part of the world, and the world deserves to be built with care whether or not anyone is looking closely enough to see. The paradoxes the show builds into its bones are not the paradoxes of a story that ran out of ideas. They are the paradoxes of a world built by people who understood that the truest worlds are the ones that hold contradictions without resolving them. That the most honest thing a story can do is refuse to simplify what is not simple. That the experience of sitting with two true things that press against each other and refuse to merge is not discomfort but recognition. Recognition of the world as it actually is. You watched this show when you were young and something in it reached you that you did not have words for. You came back to it older and found more. You are here now, listening to it described in the dark and the quiet, and you are finding still more. Not because the show changed. Because you did. Because the world gave you things to know, and those things opened new windows into what the show had been holding for you, patiently, across whatever years passed between when you last watched and right now. That is the final paradox. The show was always smarter than you were, not in a condescending way, but in a generous way. It knew you would come back. It knew you would be different. It prepared something for the you who would return, alongside everything it gave you the first time, and the second time, and every time since. It has been patient. It has been waiting, the way all good things wait, without urgency, in the confidence that the person it is waiting for will find their way back eventually. They always do. And now we rest. The paradoxes do not need to be resolved before sleep takes you. That is rather the point of them. A paradox is not a problem waiting to be solved. It is an invitation to hold two true things at once, and discover that you are spacious enough to hold them. That the mind, given enough quiet, is large enough to contain contradictions without needing to choose between them. That the world, when you stop demanding it be simple, reveals itself to be richer and stranger and more honest than simple ever could have been. Aang is a pacifist who fought a war. Zuko is a villain who is always the hero. Katara is the gentlest person in the show and also, occasionally, the most frightening. Fire is destruction and fire is life. Water heals and water controls. The Avatar cycle is a gift and a burden. The war broke the world and forged the people who fixed it. Iroh commanded armies and now makes tea, and both things are the most authentic expression of who he is. Balance requires constant motion. Resolution requires accepting that some things cannot be resolved. All of it is true. All of it fits in the same story, in the same world, built by people who believed that the children watching a cartoon on a Saturday afternoon deserved the same intellectual honesty that the world would eventually demand of them. Who believe that the best thing you can give a young person is not a world with clean answers, but a world large enough to contain the questions. Close your eyes now. Let the paradoxes settle around you like the questions they are. Let them be present without demanding resolution. Let the world be as complicated as it actually is, and let that complication be, tonight, restful, because it is. When you stop fighting the complexity and simply breathe inside it, it holds you, keeping something real and alive for the moment when the world is ready to receive it again. Sleep well tonight. Sleep slowly. You have been paying attention, and attention is the rarest and most generous thing a person can offer. The show was built to deserve it. It does deserve it. And it will be here when you come back, holding whatever it is holding for the next version of you, patiently, in the way of things that were made with care and know they have time. Good night. If this helped you find some rest tonight, a like on the video is the simplest thing you can do to help this channel keep making these. It costs nothing and it means more than you might think. And if you are not already subscribed, please do. It is free, it keeps these coming, and it means the next one will find you when you need it. Thank you for being here. Part 13. The Sokka Paradox. The ordinary person in an extraordinary world. Sokka is 15 years old when the story opens. The oldest male left in the Southern Water Tribe after every man who could fight went to fight, and he is also, in every measurable way, ordinary. Not ordinary in the deflating sense that the word sometimes carries. Ordinary in the precise sense. He cannot bend. He does not have a spiritual gift or a cosmic destiny or a power that sets him apart from the fabric of the world. He has intelligence, which is real and considerable and often underestimated. He has humor, which is both his armor and his offering to every room he enters. He has a boomerang that comes back to him every time he throws it except once, at the very end. And that single exception is the most eloquent thing the show ever says about loss. The Sokka Paradox is the one the show builds most quietly and resolves most carefully, because it is the most human paradox the show contains. Every other character in the story has something that sets them apart from the ordinary. Aang is the Avatar. Katara is a prodigy. Toph is the greatest earthbender alive. Zuko is a prince who carries destiny in the shape of a scar. Even Appa is the last sky bison. Irreplaceable, ancient, sacred, and Sokka is a 15-year-old boy from a small tribe at the bottom of the world who cannot bend water or earth or fire or air. He is the person who is just a person in a story about people who are much more than that. The paradox lives in what the story does with this. It does not resolve Sokka's ordinariness by giving him a secret power. It does not discover that he had latent waterbending potential all along. It does not grant him energy bending or an ancient weapon or a spiritual connection that elevates him above the other non-benders in the world. The show looks at Sokka for 3 seasons and says, he is what he is. And then it shows you, carefully, across 61 episodes, what being what he is actually amounts to. It amounts to everything. The Day of Black Sun invasion plan, the central military operation of the first half of Season 3, is Sokka's plan. He designed it. He mapped it. He identified the window of the eclipse, calculated the travel time of the invasion force, planned the supply lines and the diversionary elements, and the timing of the simultaneous attacks. He presented it to the Earth King's generals, a 15-year-old boy standing in front of professional military commanders and explaining a plan that they then adopted and executed. It does not fully succeed, but it does not fail because the plan was flawed. It fails because the Fire Nation knew it was coming, which was not a failure of the plan itself, but of the information security surrounding it. The plan was sound. And then in the finale, when the airship fleet needs to be destroyed, when the show has distributed its available heroes across multiple simultaneous crises, and Sokka finds himself aboard a Fire Nation warship with Toph and Suki, he improvises. He takes what is in front of him, and he assembles it into something that works. He flies one ship into another. He coordinates the destruction of the fleet from inside the fleet. He does the thing that saves the world from the sky on that particular day, without bending, without a cosmic gift, without any tool except the mind he has always had and the willingness to use it until it finds the solution. The Sokka Paradox, stated plainly, the person the story seems to need least, The one who appears to add the least supernatural value to a group of supernatural people turns out to be indispensable in ways the story is not always loud about but is always consistent about. Without Sokka, the invasion plan does not exist. Without the invasion plan, the Fire Nation does not know the group is a threat in the specific way that makes them respond the way they respond, which sets in motion the events of the second half of Season 3. Without Sokka in the finale, the airship fleet operates without interference. Without that interference, the comet's amplification of Fire Nation power kills far more people than it does. He is necessary, not despite his ordinariness, through it. Because the specific combination of things he is, curious and strategic and irreverent and willing to look at a problem from an angle that a person with supernatural ability might never think to examine, is precisely what the group requires in the moments that his gifts are what the moment needs. The world did not need another Bender. It needed Sokka. And underneath all of this runs the quieter paradox of his humor. Sokka uses jokes the way Iroh uses tea, as a way of being present in a moment that would otherwise be unbearable, as an offering of warmth to people who are cold and tired and afraid, as a mechanism for introducing a breath of air into situations that have become so dense with seriousness that they risk collapsing under their own weight. His humor is not a defense mechanism in the dismissive sense. It is a service. It is what he brings to the group the way Katara brings healing and Aang brings hope, and Toph brings the irresistible force of someone who has decided to be exactly herself, regardless of what the world would prefer. When the humor stops, which happens rarely and briefly and always for a specific reason, the silence is louder than anything he has said. After the day of Black Sun fails and his father is captured, the jokes stop, not as performance, as genuine loss. And the absence of them tells you more about how much they cost him than any explicit statement of feeling ever could. He is funny because it is how he loves people. And the moment when the love is overwhelmed by grief is the moment the funny stops, and you feel the size of what was there all along. The boomerang always came back, until the one time it did not. And the show never addresses the loss because it does not need to. The loss is the size of everything the boomerang represented, which is the water tribe and home, and the specific comfort of things that return to you no matter how far you throw them, and the finale takes that away without ceremony and without explanation, and the taking away is the show's most precise statement about what the war costs the people who won it. They won, and they are missing things that will not come back. Part 14. The Azula Paradox, the perfect weapon that turned on itself. Azula is 14 years old and she is terrifying. This is not a matter of opinion within the show's world. Every character who faces her, including Zuko who grew up with her and knows every trick she has ever used, is afraid of her in a way that the show depicts honestly rather than dismissively. She is a prodigy in the precise meaning of that word, a person whose ability far exceeds what experience or training alone should be able to produce. Her firebending is blue. Her lightning is instant and accurate and executed with the casual efficiency of someone breathing. Her tactical mind operates at a level that makes Admiral Zhao look like an amateur and makes even Ozai, who is not a man who gives praise easily, speak of her with something that functions as admiration. And she is also, the show makes clear in a slow and terrible accumulation of evidence, deeply and foundationally broken. Not in the aftermath of the war. From the beginning. Shaped by her childhood into a person for whom connection is either a tool or a threat, for whom loyalty is something to be manufactured through fear because she has never been shown another model, for whom the difference between love and control has been so thoroughly collapsed by the environment she grew up in that she cannot access one without it becoming the other. The Azula paradox is this. The Fire Nation built the perfect weapon in her, and the perfect weapon has no loyalty to the hand that holds it. It has only its own nature, which is to be perfectly sharp and perfectly aimed, and when the things it was aimed at resolve themselves or disappear, that sharpness has nowhere to go but inward. Her breakdown in the finale is not a surprise if you have been watching carefully. The signs are present throughout Season 3, in the moments where her control slips slightly, where the performance of effortless superiority develops hairline cracks that most viewers miss because Azula is so consistently composed that the cracks look like nothing, but they are something. The paranoia about Mai and Ty Lee is the first visible sign, the first moment where her ability to read situations accurately, which has been her most reliable tool, begins to misfire. She is right that they might betray her. She is not right about the specific form it takes or the specific moment it comes. And then the firebending test before the coronation, where she is alone in the palace preparing herself for the ceremony that will make her Fire Lord, and she begins to see her mother in the mirror. Her mother, who left when Azula was young, whose love or absence of love or the particular quality of her regard for Azula has never been fully explained by the show and perhaps never needed to be. Whatever her mother's love was, it was not what Azula needed. And the hallucination of her, appearing in the mirror and speaking with the softness of someone who genuinely loves her, is the most devastating scene in the series because it tells you, without any dialogue that states it directly, that the thing Azula is missing and has always been missing is the one thing power cannot provide. She has everything the Fire Nation told her was worth having. She is brilliant. She is powerful. She is feared by everyone she has ever stood across from. She has her father's approval, which has been the currency of worth in the world she grew up in. And she is completely alone in a palace in the middle of the night, talking to a hallucination of her mother, because the people who were supposed to be her friends betrayed her, not out of cruelty, but because they finally found the courage to refuse to be afraid of her anymore. Mai and Ty Lee betray her not because they stop caring about her, but, in some sense, because they do not stop caring. Mai's act at the Boiling Rock, blocking Azula's fire to protect Sokka, is not an act of indifference to their history. It is an act that says, I care about something more than your approval. That I care about something more than your approval is not abandonment. It is the thing that friendship actually requires. It is the thing Azula has never allowed anyone close enough to offer her. The paradox runs deeper still. Azula's power comes from the same place as her destruction. The precision of her mind, the absolute control she exerts over every variable in every situation, is both her extraordinary ability and the reason she cannot sustain herself. Control is exhausting in proportion to how completely you attempt to maintain it. The people who seem most perfectly in control are often the people expending the most energy on the maintenance of that control, and when the maintenance fails, as it always eventually does, the collapse is proportional to the effort that preceded it. Her fire goes from blue to erratic in the finale. The color change is the show's most elegant image of psychological disintegration. The precise, high-temperature flame losing its temperature, losing its color, losing the quality that made it singular. She is not losing her bending. She is losing the internal state that made her bending look the way it looked. The fire always expressed the person. When the person fractures, the fire fractures with it. Azula is the show's argument that power without love is ultimately self-consuming, not as a moral lesson delivered through a villain's defeat, as a careful, sustained, genuinely sympathetic portrait of what happens to a person when the world they grew up in gave them every tool except the one that would have allowed them to use the others without destroying themselves. She is not a monster. She is a child who was raised to be a weapon. And the show's tragedy is that she succeeded so completely at becoming the weapon that by the time she might have been reachable, the weapon was all that was left. Part 15. The Grief Paradox. What the show does with loss. Avatar. The Last Airbender is, at its core, a show about loss. Not loss as an obstacle on the way to the resolution. Loss as the condition of the story, the weather inside which everything else takes place. The air nomads are gone. Katara's mother is gone. Sokka's girlfriend Yu becomes the moon and is therefore present everywhere and reachable nowhere. Iroh's son is gone. Zuko's mother is gone in a different way, which is the way of a person who is alive somewhere in the world, but has been removed from your life so completely that you have no way to know if the memory of her is accurate or wishful. The show handles all of this with a restraint that is itself a form of care. It does not underline the grief. It does not set grief scenes apart from the rest of the narrative, with swelling music and long pauses designed to tell you what to feel. The grief is simply present. It is woven into the structure of how every character moves through the world. You see it in the slight hesitation Aang sometimes has before mentioning the air nomads, as though the mention itself costs him something. You see it in the specific care Katara takes of everyone around her, which is the care of someone who knows exactly how quickly and completely people can be taken, and who therefore refuses to take the time she has with the people she loves for granted. The grief paradox is that the show uses loss to generate the most profound forms of connection it depicts. Aang and Katara find each other partly because they are both people who have been broken open by what they have lost, and open people can reach each other in ways that armored ones cannot. Zuko and his uncle have the relationship they have because grief, Iroh's grief over Lu Ten and Zuko's grief over the mother he lost and the father he has never really had, makes them both available to be loved in a way that ungrieved people often are not. Toph's friendship with the group is rooted in the specific loneliness of growing up unseen, which is its own form of loss, the loss of being known. None of the show's warmest moments exist independently of the cold ones that precede them. The warmth in Avatar is always specifically the warmth that follows specific cold. It is earned in a way that warmth without loss is not, and the grief is not resolved by the warmth. The grief and the warmth coexist. They occupy the same space. They are not opposites. They are the same feeling at different temperatures. This is why the Iroh scene in Tales of Ba Sing Se is as devastating as it is. Not because the show suddenly decides to make you feel something, but because everything before it has been building the specific weight that scene carries. You have watched Iroh for an entire season and a half. You have watched him make tea in impossible circumstances and lose Paisho games on purpose and speak wisdom to Zuko in the form of apparent non-sequiturs that turn out to be precisely the right thing. And then you see him, alone, in a park in Ba Sing Se, setting up a small memorial. And the voice actor who plays him, Mako Iwamatsu, sings a song to a dead boy, and the song is quiet and simple and the camera watches from a distance, because some things should be watched from a distance, and the episode aired 2 months after Mako died. The grief in that scene is real in more than one register simultaneously. It is Iroh's grief for his son. It is the grief of the people who made the show for the man who gave Iroh his voice. It is your grief for whatever specific person or thing the scene asks you to think of. And the show holds all of those griefs at once, without distinguishing between them, because grief does not recognize the boundary between fiction and reality. It simply finds the opening and enters. The grief paradox. The show is about saving the world, and every act of saving the world is built on a foundation of things that were not saved, things that are gone and will not come back, things that the characters carry forward, not because carrying them is painless, but because putting them down is not an option they are willing to take. The world is saved at the end. The loss remains. Both are true. Both always will be. Part 16. The memory paradox: who carries the past and what the carrying does. The Avatar is the world's memory. This is not a metaphor the show makes explicit, but it is the structural reality of what the Avatar cycle describes. Every Avatar who has ever lived is carried forward inside the current Avatar, available for consultation, present as a voice or a vision when the moment requires wisdom that the living person does not yet possess on their own. The Avatar is the institution of memory itself, given a body and a set of bending abilities and sent back into the world generation after generation. But memory is not the same as truth, and here is where the memory paradox lives. The past avatars in Aang's archive are not neutral observers. They are specific people with specific biases and specific unresolved feelings about the moments that defined their lives. Roku is not a neutral repository of past avatar wisdom. Roku is a man who failed in a specific way and who therefore has a specific orientation toward the situations that most resemble his failure. When he tells Aang about his friendship with Sozin, he is telling a story about himself, about the particular shape of his regret, about the thing he would do differently if he could go back. His guidance is real, but it is also personal, colored by the specific experience of being the avatar who did not prevent the 100-Year War. And Aang's ability to access his past lives is not consistently reliable. The avatar state, which is the mechanism by which that access becomes most complete, is also the condition under which Aang is most dangerous and most difficult to control. The more complete the access to past life wisdom, the less present Aang himself is inside his own actions. The avatar state is the condition of maximum wisdom and minimum individual judgment simultaneously, which is a paradox so deep it sits at the very center of what the avatar is. Consider what happens when Aang dies in the cave beneath Ba Sing Se. He is struck by Azula's lightning. Katara brings him back with spirit water. And when he comes back, He has lost his connection to his past lives. The lightning severed it. Temporarily, it turns out, but the loss is real and frightening, and it tells you something the show has been careful not to state directly. The Avatar's connection to the past is not intrinsic to the person. It is held by a spirit, Rava, who carries the accumulated memory of the Avatar line. Without Rava, Aang is still Aang. He is still a gifted airbender with genuine kindness and a genuine relationship with the spirit world. But he is not the Avatar in the full sense. He is a person without the institution. What does it mean to be the Avatar without the memory? What is the person underneath the office? This is the question the show does not fully explore but cannot avoid asking, because the answer to it is also the answer to the question of what Aang's identity actually is. He was told from childhood that being the Avatar was what he was, and then he lost the connection to the Avatar line and found that he was still himself, still a person, still someone worth being, even without the weight of 10,000 years behind him. The memory paradox. The institution of memory lives in a person who is themselves in the process of becoming someone with memories worth adding to the archive. Every Avatar is simultaneously the keeper of the past and the creator of the future that the next Avatar will inherit. The memory flows forward. It is never complete. It is always being added to. And the person doing the adding is always, in some sense, the least experienced person in the room, the newest Avatar. The one who does not yet know what they will contribute to the archive that the person after them will consult. Aang does not yet know, at the end of the series, what his contribution to the archive will look like from the outside. He only knows what it felt like from the inside, the conviction that there was another way, the refusal to become something other than what he was. The specific quality of staying soft in a world that kept insisting softness was insufficient. The next Avatar will hear that voice. And when they face their own Ozai, their own unanswerable question, they will have Aang's answer in the archive, not as an instruction, as a possibility, as the proof that one person, in one moment, with nothing but conviction to hold on to, found a door in a wall that everyone else had certified was solid. Part 17. The World Paradox. The place that feels real because it was built to be. There is a specific feeling the Avatar world produces in people who spend time inside it, and the feeling has a quality that is difficult to name precisely. It is not exactly the feeling of immersion that other fictional worlds produce. It is more particular than that. It is the feeling of a place that has corners you have not been shown, that has history continuing outside the frame of what the story chose to depict, that obeys rules the show did not always need to state, because the rules are consistent enough to be inferred. When you watch Avatar and you believe, unreservedly and without effort, that this world is real, the believing is not the product of spectacular animation or clever dialogue or compelling characters, though all of those things are present. The believing is the product of the accumulation of 1,000 small consistencies that your brain processes below the level of conscious attention. The lunar cycle tracks across the episodes. The architecture of each nation is internally consistent with the geography and resources of that nation. The food eaten by each culture reflects the climate and the philosophy and the historical relationship between that culture and the land it lives on. The martial arts behind every bending style connect to a real philosophical tradition in ways that make the bending feel like the expression of a worldview rather than an arbitrary supernatural ability. None of this is necessary for a children's cartoon. A children's cartoon can function perfectly well, can entertain and hold attention, and even move people, without tracking the lunar cycle or hiring a cultural consultant to handbrush real Chinese calligraphy on every scroll and sign and wanted poster in the background of every episode. The show does these things anyway, not because they are required, because the people who built the world believe that the world deserved to be built with care, whether or not anyone would ever notice. The world paradox is this. The things you do not notice are doing more work than the things you do. The calligraphy you cannot read makes the world feel older. The martial art you cannot name makes the fighting feel grounded. The lunar cycle you did not track makes the siege of the North Pole feel inevitable rather than convenient. None of these details, taken individually, would change the experience of watching the show. Taken together, accumulated across 3 seasons and absorbed below the threshold of conscious attention, they create the foundation for everything else. They are the reason the suspension of disbelief is effortless. They are the reason you never have to decide to believe in the Avatar world. You simply do. because the world never gives you a reason to doubt it. This is the paradox of craft at its most precise. The better the craft, the less visible it is. The more care that goes into building a world, the more the world appears to have simply always existed, which means the more the builders disappear. The show's greatest achievement is something you cannot point to directly, because its greatest achievement is invisibility. It is the feeling of a world that was loved into existence, present in every frame, without being locatable in any single one. The world was built by people who believed that the things you do not see are just as important as the things you do, that the invisible architecture is what holds the visible world together, that the hidden facts are not extras, they are the foundation, and the foundation does not need to be recognized to do its work. The foundation simply holds, whether you know it is there or not. This is why Avatar endures beyond nostalgia, beyond the generation that first watched it in 2005, and the generations that found it on streaming platforms in the decades after. The world holds. It holds because it was built to hold. Not just for the viewers who watched it once in childhood, for the viewers who came back as teenagers and found more, who came back as adults and found still more, who are listening now, in the quiet of late night or early morning, and finding something else again. The world was always there, full of things you have not found yet, patient as the earth itself, as old as air, as warm as a fire that has remembered what it is for, as willing to change as water moving through the darkness toward wherever the darkness opens into light. Part 18, the ending paradox, what it means when something this complete finishes. There is a particular quality to the ending of Avatar, The Last Airbender, that is not quite like the ending of any other story. It is complete without being closed. It is resolved without being finished. It hands you back to yourself, gently, like a thing that was borrowed and is now being returned, and it does this so carefully that the returning takes a moment to register. The finale of the show was produced as a feature-length event, 4 parts totaling approximately 92 minutes. Not a normal episode, not a 2-part special, but a movie-length conclusion to 3 years of storytelling. The decision to give the ending that much space was not extravagance. It was honesty. The show understood that what it had built across 60 episodes could not be genuinely addressed in 22 minutes, and it refused to pretend otherwise. The space was necessary. The space allowed every thread to be brought to its proper resting point, rather than dropped or rushed or glossed over in service of getting to the final image faster. And yet the ending, for all its length and for all its care, does not pretend to conclude things that cannot be concluded. Zuko will govern the Fire Nation for decades. The work of that governance has not begun. Aang will face the challenge of rebuilding a culture from a single person's memory for the rest of his life. That challenge has not resolved. Katara will carry her mother's absence and her own fury and her own extraordinary capacity for love forward into whatever life comes next, and none of those things will settle into a simple shape. The ending paradox is the paradox of all good endings, which is that a genuine conclusion requires both completion and continuation. Completion of the arc, continuation of the life. The story ends. The people do not. They go on being people in the world the story built, and the world the story built keeps existing after the camera stops following them. And the knowledge of that continuation, the sense that these people will have Tuesday mornings and difficult conversations and small pleasures and moments of doubt long after the final frame, is precisely what makes the ending feel real rather than convenient. The sunset in the final scene is not a symbol of completion. It is a symbol of transition. Day becomes, night becomes day. The wheel turns. The Avatar cycle continues. The world that was nearly burned to ash will rebuild itself slowly, in the way that worlds rebuild themselves, which is imperfectly and incompletely, and with more effort than the people doing the rebuilding could have anticipated, and more grace than the people who caused the damage deserve. The show ends. The world does not. And this is the final expression of every paradox the show has held across its 3 seasons. The resolution is real and the work is unfinished, and both of those things are true simultaneously. The war is over and the aftermath is just beginning. The Avatar has saved the world, and the saved world is full of people who have to figure out what to do with being saved. The villain is defeated, and the ideas that made the villain possible are still in the air, still in the education system, still in the stories that the Fire Nation tells its children about why the war was necessary and right, Nothing is finished. Everything is possible. The two truths live side by side, as they always have, as they always will, and the Avatar world goes on being a place where things keep becoming, and nothing is ever entirely fixed, and the balance is always in motion, and the bridge between the human world and the spirit world is always occupied by whoever is alive. Enough, and open enough, and stubborn enough to refuse to come down from it. Aang is 12 years old and he is the bridge. He is 12 years old and he is 100 years old and he is every avatar who has ever lived, and he is also, irreducibly, himself. A bald kid with a flying bison and a lemur on his shoulder and an enormous laugh and a terror of becoming something harder than he is and a love so wide it encompasses everything it touches. He is the last air nomad and the first of something new. He is the end of one cycle and the continuation of another. He is a paradox that breathes and laughs and refuses to stop moving forward. And so the show is, too. It is the end of something. It is also, every time someone finds it for the first time, the beginning. A final thought, quietly. We have moved through a great deal of territory tonight. Paradox by paradox, character by character, world by world. And if you have been listening from the beginning, if you started where most people start these, and you are still here now, you are likely very close to the edge of sleep. And I want to say something before you go. The paradoxes we explored tonight are not the show's weaknesses. They are not the places where the story failed to resolve itself neatly. They are the places where the story was most honest, most generous, most willing to say, this is as complicated as things actually are, and I trust you to live inside that complication without needing me to simplify it for you. Aang running away was real, and its consequences were real, and his return and his conviction and his refusal to become something other than himself were also real. Both? Zuko hunting the Avatar was real, and his fundamental goodness was also real. Both. The Fire Nation's destruction was real, and the contributions of Fire Nation technology to the world that came after were also real. Both. Iroh's history as a general was real, and his gentleness in the tea shop was also real. Both. The show does not resolve these. It holds them. It holds them across 61 episodes with the steadiness of very old hands and the patience of someone who has been waiting a long time for you to be ready to hear this. Both things are true. Both things have always been true. The world is the size that can contain both. You watched this show when you were young and it gave you something you did not have words for. You are here now, in whatever hour this is, and it is still giving you things, not because it changed. Because you did. And because the show was always large enough to meet whoever you became. That is the final paradox, and it is the most personal one. The show was made for many people. It was made for the child who watched it on Saturday afternoons, and the teenager who re-watched it alone at night, and the adult who put it on in the background while doing something else and found themselves, slowly, doing nothing else, just watching. It was made for the person who needs something to fall asleep to tonight, in whatever city, in whatever hour, in whatever small geography of warmth and quiet they have built for themselves in the middle of whatever their life currently is. It was made for you. Not in the exclusive sense, in the generous sense. The sense that says, here is a world built with enough care to have something for everyone, and here is what it has for you tonight, in this particular moment of your particular life. Take it. Carry it forward. Let it settle into your sleep like something that belongs there. You have been paying attention. And attention is the rarest thing a person can offer. The show deserved it. It always has. Good night, wherever you are. However late it is, sleep well.